Sarah had been on 3 dates from the app in the past 2 months. The first had been awkward but harmless. The second had been pleasant enough but had gone nowhere. The third was Daniel, and Daniel had seemed different from the moment she matched with him. His profile was straightforward, a few photos that looked natural rather than carefully constructed. A short bio that was funny without trying too hard. He worked in landscape architecture. He had a dog named Biscuit. He had been on the app for 3 months and described himself as someone who was tired of pretending that small talk was enough. They talked for 2 weeks before agreeing to meet. The conversation had been easy in the way that good conversations are easy, moving between topics without effort, neither of them performing for the other. By the end of the first week, Sarah had told her friend Jess about him in the tone that Jess recognized immediately as meaning something. They met at a wine bar in the city centre on a Thursday evening. He looked like his photos. This alone put him ahead of a significant percentage of the men Sarah had met from the app. The date lasted 3 hours. The conversation moved the same way it had moved in the messages, without effort, without performance. He was funny in person. He listened when she talked in the specific way that some people listen, not waiting for their turn to speak, but actually taking in what she was saying. She walked to her car, feeling something she had not felt after a date in a long time. Hopeful. He texted before she had even started the engine. He said he had a really good time and asked if she would want to do it again. She said yes before she had pulled out of the parking space. The second date was dinner the following Saturday, a restaurant she liked in a neighborhood she knew well. He picked her up, which she had decided to allow because the 2 weeks of conversation had built a trust that felt earned rather than assumed. He opened the car door. He did not make a performance of it. He simply did it the way a person does something they were raised to do without thinking about it. Dinner was even better than the wine bar. He drove her home afterward. She invited him in for coffee and immediately felt self-conscious about the cliché of it and said so, and he laughed in a way that made her feel immediately less self-conscious. He stayed for an hour. He did not push for anything. He left at a reasonable time with a hug at the door that lasted a moment longer than a friendly hug, but not so long that it felt like pressure. She closed the door and leaned against it in a way she would have been embarrassed about if anyone had seen her. She texted Jess immediately. Jess sent back 7 consecutive enthusiastic responses. The third date was his suggestion. A Sunday afternoon walk in a park outside the city, followed by lunch at a pub nearby. Casual and easy, he said. No pressure, just a nice day. She agreed without hesitation. She drove to the park and found him already there, waiting by the entrance with 2 coffees in a carrier and Biscuit on a lead. The dog took to her immediately. She took this as a good sign. She had always believed that dogs were reliable judges of character. They walked for nearly 2 hours. The park was large and quiet in the way that parks outside the city are quiet, with actual space between people rather than the compressed proximity of city green spaces. They talked and let Biscuit run and found a bench by a small lake where they sat and finished their coffees and watched the water. Everything about the afternoon felt comfortable and right. Then Biscuit ran off into the tree line at the far edge of the park. Daniel apologized and went after him. Sarah sat on the bench and looked at the lake. She picked up her phone to check a message from Jess. While she was looking at her phone, a notification appeared at the top of her screen, a new match on the app. She almost dismissed it without looking. She had not opened the app in weeks. She had been meaning to delete it, but she tapped it without thinking. The profile that had matched with her loaded on her screen. She stared at it. The profile name was different, the photos were different, the bio was different, but the face in the photographs was Daniel's face. Not similar to Daniel's face. Daniel's face, same eyes, same jaw, same slight asymmetry to the smile that she had spent 3 dates finding endearing. A different name, a different job, a different dog. She read the bio. He described himself as someone who was tired of pretending that small talk was enough. The exact same phrase, word for word. Sarah sat very still on the bench by the lake. She looked at the profile photographs more carefully. In the second photograph, he was standing outside a house she did not recognize. In the third, he was at what appeared to be a party, arm around a woman whose face had been partially cropped out of the frame. She enlarged the photograph. The woman's face was not fully visible, but her jacket was. Sarah looked down at her own jacket. The same jacket, the same color, the same style, the same small tear on the left sleeve that she had been meaning to repair for months. She heard footsteps on the path behind her. Biscuit appeared first, lead trailing, tongue out. Daniel came out of the tree line a few seconds later, smiling and slightly out of breath, and sat back down beside her on the bench. He asked if everything was all right. She looked at him. She thought about the 2 weeks of conversation, the way he listened, the ease of it, the way it had felt earned rather than constructed. She thought about the jacket in the photograph. She said everything was fine, just a message from work. She closed the app. She put her phone in her pocket, and she spent the rest of that afternoon by the lake calculating the distance from where she was sitting to where she had parked her car, and whether she could get there before him if she needed to. Marcus had lived alone for 2 years. He had chosen the house on Alderman Street because it was affordable, because it was quiet, and because the landlord had not asked too many questions at the viewing. It was an older house in an older part of the city, high ceilings, deep windowsills, the kind of place that had clearly been several different things to several different people over the course of its long life. He had moved in on a Saturday in March and had spent the first week getting the rooms into a state he was comfortable with. He was not an especially domestic person, but he had a reasonable instinct for what made a space feel livable, and he applied it methodically to each room in turn. By the end of the first week, he felt at home. By the end of the first month, he had learned the rhythms of the house in the way that you learn any new environment. Which radiators took longest to warm up, which floorboard on the landing announced itself regardless of how carefully you stepped, which windows rattled when the wind came from the north. He was a light sleeper by nature, and he adjusted to the sounds of the house quickly. Within 6 weeks, he slept through most of what the building produced in the night, and his body had calibrated to filter out everything that was simply the house being the house. Which was why the night he first heard the draw was significant. He was lying in bed on a Tuesday night in late autumn, somewhere between awake and asleep, when he heard it from the kitchen directly below his bedroom. The sound of a drawer being opened, not thrown open, not forced, simply the smooth sliding motion of a drawer being pulled out from its housing with the particular wooden resistance that kitchen drawers always have. He lay still and listened. The drawer slid closed again. A pause, then another drawer opened, then closed. Marcus sat up. He sat in the dark and listened to the house. Silence. He told himself the most obvious things. Old houses settled in ways that produced sounds that the imagination assembled into narratives. Temperature changes in the night caused wood to expand and contract in ways that could approximate almost any sound if you were listening for something. He lay back down. He did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, he went downstairs and looked at the kitchen drawers. They were all closed. Everything was as he had left it. He made coffee and told himself he had been half asleep, and that half asleep was not a reliable state for accurate perception. The sound did not return for 11 days. When it did, it was the same. 2 in the morning, the smooth slide of a drawer opening and then closing, then another, then silence. Marcus got up this time. He stood at the top of the stairs and listened. The kitchen was directly below. The sounds had come from the kitchen. He was certain of this. He went downstairs. The kitchen was empty and dark and entirely undisturbed. He checked the back door, locked. He checked the window, closed. He stood in the kitchen in the dark for several minutes and then went back to bed. He began keeping a log. The dates and times the sound occurred. How many drawers he could count from the sound. Whether there was a pattern. Over the following 2 months, he accumulated enough entries to see one. The sound occurred every 11 to 13 days, always between 1 and 3 in the morning. Always the same sequence, 2 drawers, a pause, then silence. Marcus was a methodical person by nature. He approached the mystery the way he approached most things, with patience and an interest in finding the most rational explanation available. He checked the pipes. He checked the floorboards in the kitchen ceiling for movement that might account for the sound. He had the landlord in to look at the radiators. Nothing explained it. Then one night he was awake before the sound started, and he positioned himself at the kitchen doorway in the dark and waited. 2:17 in the morning, the sound came. He was standing 6 feet from the drawers when it happened. He watched the drawers. Not one of them moved. The sound was coming from the correct location. The sound was exactly as he had heard it from his bedroom, but the drawers themselves were completely still. He stood in the kitchen doorway in the dark and listened to the sound of a drawer opening and closing that he could hear perfectly clearly, and that was producing no visible effect on any of the drawers in front of him. He thought about what that meant for a long time. Then he thought about what the house had been before he lived there. He called his landlord the following morning and asked casually about the previous tenants. The landlord listed them briefly: a couple, a single woman, a young man who had stayed only a few months. Marcus asked about the layout of the kitchen, whether it had always been configured the same way. The landlord said the kitchen had been renovated about 15 years ago. Before the renovation, it had been smaller. The back wall had been moved outward to create more space. Marcus asked what had been behind the original back wall. The landlord thought about this. He said there had been a small room, a pantry of some kind, original to the house. Marcus asked what was behind his kitchen wall now. A pause. The landlord said just the foundations, old brickwork, nothing back there. Marcus thanked him and ended the call. He stood in his kitchen and looked at the back wall. He thought about a small room that no longer existed. He thought about drawers that made sounds without moving. He thought about what it might mean if a space that had been sealed inside a wall for 15 years still occasionally remembered what it had contained, and what those contents might be doing in there, in the dark, every 11 to 13 days, still opening, still closing, still looking for something that had not been there for a very long time. In the summer of 2019, a man named Owen was kayaking alone on a lake in rural Vermont. It was a hobby he had taken up 2 years earlier following a difficult period in his life, and he had found in it exactly what he needed: silence, physical effort, the particular mental stillness that came from being on open water with nothing required of him except to move. He went out most weekends when the weather allowed. He knew the lake well by that point, its moods in different weather, its quiet coves and open stretches, the way the light changed across it at different hours of the day. He was paddling along the eastern shore on a late July morning when he saw something in the water. It was shallow along the eastern edge, clear enough in the summer light to see the bottom. He had paddled this stretch many times and knew roughly what the lake bed looked like. Something white was visible through the water. He stopped paddling and drifted. The something white was rectangular, about the size of a piece of paper. He paddled closer. It was a photograph, face up on the lake bed, weighted down at one corner by a small stone, as though it had been placed there deliberately rather than dropped. The water was clear enough and shallow enough that he could see the image on the photograph from the surface. It showed a group of people standing in front of a house, 8 or 9 people, adults and children, a family gathering of some kind, everyone facing the camera, everyone smiling. Owen looked at the photograph for a long time. There was something about it that he could not immediately name. He reached into the water and retrieved it carefully. It was old, the kind of photograph that came from an era before digital cameras. The colors had the particular warmth and slight fade of film photography from several decades back. He turned it over. On the back, in faded handwriting, was a date, August 1987, and below the date a list of names, 8 names, corresponding presumably to the 8 people in the image. He turned it back over and looked at the faces. 8 people in front of a house on a summer day in 1987. He was about to place it in his dry bag to take it to shore when something made him look more carefully at the image. He was not sure what had drawn his eye. He looked at the house in the background. Then he looked at the windows of the house. 7 of the 8 people were in front of the house facing the camera. But in the upstairs window of the house, visible through the glass, was a face, a 9th person, standing inside the house looking out, not at the camera, at the group of people below. Owen looked at the 8 names on the back of the photograph. 8 names for 8 people, no 9th name. He looked at the face in the window again. It was a woman, older than most of the group outside, standing very still at the glass with an expression he could not read precisely from the faded image, but that did not look like the expression of someone who had simply missed being called outside for the photograph. It looked like the expression of someone watching from a place they could not leave. Owen put the photograph in his dry bag and paddled back to the shore. He posted the image online that evening, hoping someone might recognize the house or the family and be able to return it. Within 2 hours, he had a response. A woman who recognized the house immediately, a farmhouse near the lake that had belonged to her family for generations. The photograph was from a family reunion in the summer of 1987, she said. She could name everyone in it. Owen typed back and asked about the woman in the upstairs window. A long pause. Then the response came. The woman said there was no one in the upstairs window. Owen looked at the photograph again. The face was clearly visible in the glass. He could see it in the image he had posted online. He was looking at it on his screen right now. He typed back and described exactly what he could see. The window, the face, the woman standing at the glass. Another long pause. Then the response came. The woman said that the upstairs of the farmhouse had been empty for years before the 1987 reunion. Her grandmother had passed away in that room in 1974. The room had been closed off after her death and not opened again for many years. She said nobody had gone up there that day. She said nobody ever went up there. Owen sat at his kitchen table with the photograph in his hands for a long time. He looked at the face in the window, the expression he had not been able to read precisely in the faded image. He could read it now. It was not the expression of someone watching from a place they could not leave. It was simply the expression of someone watching, patient and still and entirely present, the way a person looks when they are watching something they love from a distance and are content for the moment simply to watch.